is. I have 2 minutes to tell you everything we know about the OCS project at Fort Knox. 3 minutes. Okay. So Dan said, tell the people briefly about why we're here. Well, naturally, it's a reunion. How did it all get started? It started around a dinner in 1995. 3 of my classmates, me, a fellow by the name Dave Dirksey, who's not here, Tim Dara, who is sitting over here. He was in Denver on a supposed business trip. And Dave Dirksey's wife, Linda, had Tim and my wife, Sandy, and I out to their place southeast of Denver for dinner. And as would have it, we started talking OCS and telling stories, and all truthful stories. And I'm sure Sandy and Linda have heard those before, but we had to tell them again. And the more we talked, they encouraged us to have a class reunion. And so think this is 1995. I was not teaching that particular semester because of I had grown some kidney stones and could not function too well. So I took it upon myself to try to figure out who the graduates were in our class. We knew there were 80, but we could only remember 14 names. I did not have a graduation program. I don't think Tim did. Dirksey eventually found one. So we were starting from scratch. So I called the Armor School Research, no, I didn't call the Armor School Research Library. I called the Patton Museum. And they said, we have all of the information from the OC Brigade when it closed down in February of '68. They're in boxes, back in storage, so you can come down and go through them if you like. There are class rosters, there are guidelines, there are photos, there's all kinds of stuff. I said, well, the trouble is, I live in Colorado Springs and I'm still working, so we can't get to it. Long story short, all of that information has disappeared someplace. We don't know if it's at the National Archives or if it's been incinerated or what. So maybe that's something we will need to do next, is try to see if that exists. But anyway, there was no centrally located information for OCS about, with rosters, etc. Eventually, I was led to the Armor School Research Library. One of the librarians there said, yes, we have rosters here. I can make you a copy, but we'll have to redact certain information. So they sent it to me, and they redacted everything I needed to know, except for names. You couldn't tell who graduated and who didn't graduate. There were no enlisted service numbers. So I called a former roommate of mine, and we were at Fort Carson together. He had stayed in the military. He was stationed at the Pentagon then. He was in 06, and called my buddy Norman and said, help. He said, what do you need? So I explained it to him. He called the Armor School Research Library and convinced them to resend our class roster with the names and the RA and US designations in the first 2 numbers of that service number. From that, we had a key where it would show what state issued those service numbers, and then we would look at those states. Most of the time, the numbers did equate to the correct states. For some reason, I was an RA 16, 15442. That was supposed to have been issued in Wisconsin, but I was from Colorado, so that kind of compounded the thing. Finally, we located or accounted for all but 2 individuals. We thought that those 2 were deceased. A couple of years later, we found out they were both alive. However, we didn't know it at the time. We did have a class reunion in 1997. Stayed down in Radcliffe at the Gold Vault Inn. About 2/3 of our class were there. It was a fantastic time. Our wife said, you know, it's like you guys walked into that hospitality room and you guys acted like you hadn't seen each other for maybe a couple of weeks is all. You know, we were harassing each other and telling jokes and stuff like that. So we had such a wonderful time, I decided, let's see if we can expand this. So I posted comments on different military websites that I had a class roster for such and such class, which I eventually got all the class rosters from the Army School Research Library. And from there, people would notice the posting and they'd email me and I'd send them a class roster. Finally got all 53 class rosters reformatted. We think fairly accurate. And from there, it's ran into Charles Stutzman, John Moore, Hugh Preacher, Dan Eifel, eventually found Pete Manza. We were company commanders at Fort Carson together. He had the best company, I had the worst. But it was that first reunion that made me feel that this bond that we formed, and it's in 6 months, lasted and lasted and lasted. So other people should have that opportunity. My whole goal was just to get the class rosters reformatted and placed at the Armor School Research Library and in the other libraries. Well, it got out of hand, which was great. So why did we continue past that point? It continued because there was an association, and I don't mean to speak unkindly about them, but, and I think Mike Kehoe, you are a member of their Hall of Fame, and so is Malcolm Roberts. It's called the United States Army Officer Candidate School Alumni Association, and if you go to their website, it is basically directed towards infantry. Very little mention of Armor OCS, Quartermaster, Transportation, Signal, Engineer, Artillery, etc. So we felt like we were kind of footnotes to the whole thing. Pete said, we're the forgotten ones, the OCS guys. So that was enough to keep us going, keep us driving on. The response for the class rosters was very favorable. People would email and say, you know, I've been looking for years for a class roster, can't find one. And so with that source of those class rosters, this information gets disseminated out. They contact individuals, etc. And so it's just really ballooned, more than I ever thought. There were several individuals who helped a lot. Mr. Bill Hansen, who was the last librarian at the Armor School Research Library before I went to Fort Benning. When I first talked to Bill, he said, we're very short-handed here, but I'll send you rosters as I can. And he says, what's your address? I gave him our address, and we were living in the mountains northwest of Fort Collins, and the address was Livermore, Colorado, not Livermore, California, but Livermore, Colorado, which is just a little post office box, or a post office and a convenience store. He said, well, I have a cousin who lives in Livermore. He said, what's your mailing address? And I told him, he said, well, my cousin lives on that road. And come to find out, she only lived a half a mile away. And since then, Bill would send me anything and everything he could find on OCS. Thank goodness. So with that, I'd like to mention some names who have played an important part in the project. Let's see. Do you have one of the books that would you hold it up? Or for those who don't know about the book that we wrote, that book is available for purchase. We don't have order blanks here, but I think most of you have my email address. And if you would like to get a copy of that book, send me an email and I will send you the ordering link. If you don't want to use PayPal, I'll send you a hard copy order form that you will send to Dan Leifel over here, and you will get one of those books. Right now it's in the second printing. We're going to do a third printing because we've updated some of the information in it. So it's, we think we've done a halfway decent job of it. Someone said it's up to OCS standards. Some of the individuals who've been involved from early on was, ironically, one of the members from the very first class, class 9-66. If it was the first class, why is it 9-66? What happened to 1 through 8? They never got enough individuals to form up the first 8 classes, so whatever was there, they started the first class with 9-66. In other words, the ninth class in fiscal year 66. And it was A1. That individual's name was Duke Widger. Duke passed away about 2 years ago. Sorry. He formed his group up and had 2 class reunions. We got a couple of guys here from 966, all because of Duke. Another individual who couldn't be here tonight, who was very instrumental in keeping us going, was Ron Dimery from class 1666 Delta 1. What was Delta 1's motto? What did they say, John?
Spizzerectum.
Speaking of spizzerectum, sir, Ron Dimery expanded, and that particular class was a quartermaster class, 13 weeks long, that then went to, was it Fort Lee or Fort Eustis? Fort Lee, okay. That group went off to Fort Lee for the last 10 weeks of OCS and commissioning, then as quartermaster. Ron took the quartermaster OCS history and expanded it and brought it up to date. He gave inspiration to me for doing his history about OCS at Fort Knox. And he was also the very first individual to volunteer to work on a reunion. He had put together a couple of reunions for his OCS class as well. He traveled to a workshop on his own expense. He located one reunion planner that was a bust, and then he found Premier Reunion Services. And thank goodness, it's been a good experience. Ron also designed our baseball cap with the OCS emblem and the polo shirt. Ron is ill. I believe he's terminal. So he won't be here tonight. Okay, I'll get straight down this. Now we're going to get to the fellows who are here this evening. Okay, I mentioned Charles Stutzman. Charles, stand up. Class -268. Charles, I don't remember how I stumbled onto you, but you were kind enough to post some basic information. It was the statistics page on your business website. And I believe you also posted my contact information, and through that we had many, many hits on Charles' website that led individuals to me. So please give Charles a round of applause. Charles went on to go to rotary wing flight school, and he kept his wing nut tight enough to be here this evening. Another individual I located, I don't remember how, and it's John Moore over here. John Moore was in class 2567, another D company, D2. Spizzerectum again, sir. John is somewhat of a and this is an understatement, a computer guru, our Facebook guru. We've set up a Facebook group. Anytime we needed information about, how to post something on Facebook, it was John who could tell us how to do that. He also served as one of the proofreaders of the book. He's a cool-headed thinker. Retired major and also a retired elementary school teacher, so that's how cool he is when it comes to thinking. And he also created the Fiddler's Green listings that you see up here on the front table. We're in the process of expanding that as well. Thank you, John. Please give John a And now to not the worst OCE who ever graduated from OCS, Dan Leifel. Class 2367, Charlie Company, C1, next to the Whack Barracks. In the red brick barracks, right? Super researcher. I think I didn't run into you, Dan, but we made contact not long after you retired from whatever you did. Collected a paycheck. And when we first talked, you said, oh boy, I'm just retired and I don't know what I'm going to do with myself. So we found out something. We found something for you to do. You got in your car, I guess it was a car, and drove to Fort Knox and did research. And you did research. And you did research. Dan found, and I didn't know it, but I've learned it from Duke Widger, that there was a 13-week program and a 23-week program, but we didn't have the curriculum for it. We didn't know what was covered in 13 weeks as opposed to 23 weeks. Dan found that. I don't even remember where you found it, Dan, or who we found it from. But great, we have it, and it's listed in the book. He was a primary writer for the book narrative, because I knew I would never be able to get it done. So Dan, being a very astute retired corporate attorney, wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote, and the proofreaders and editors slashed and cut and burned whatever he wrote and turned it over to an individual by the name of Charlie Titus, who we will talk about here fairly soon. But please give Dan a round of applause for his work. Another individual, I don't remember how I stumbled onto. I don't remember hardly anything. That's why I have notes. So. Hugh Preacher, class 2767. Are you? If you're paying real close attention, there was a 966. That's an odd number. 2567, that's an odd number. 2367, that's an odd number. 2767 is an odd number. I've been working with a lot of odd people. And so have they. Hugh Preacher, class Golf 1, G1. If I didn't say Hugh was good at an Excel spreadsheet, I would be lying. If Hugh hasn't found a bit of information that won't fit on an Excel spreadsheet, and thank goodness for that. With all of the information that we've compiled, Hugh has been able to keep track of every change that has been related to the book. What changed? Who is responsible for the change? The date of the change? And what pages in the book changed? He also came up with the title of the book along with John, and Hugh keeps track of everything, even emails. So in my la-la mind at times, I will say, no, that didn't happen. He'll tell me exactly what day in an email I said something. So it's great. Hugh also stepped up to help on the reunion committee after Ron's illness. And Hugh is also responsible for setting up the hospitality room with all of the, I'm not supposed to say artifacts, with the demonstration that was set up in there. So Hugh, please stand up. Everybody, please. Okay, Charlie Titus, class 1367, another odd number, G2. Charlie, I think, is a semi-retired college PhD professor type from Eastern Illinois University. He served as our primary proofreader and editor of the book. He made sure the narrative and the compiled information, tables, rosters, etc., were presented in a good, cogent, understandable manner in order to bring the OCS at Fort Knox story alive for the reader. And he did an excellent, excellent job. Charlie, wherever you are, please stand up. And please, Charlie. Thank you, Charlie. Now, back in that same area, we're also blessed to have Charlie's wonderful partner, Elda Ulicki. Hopefully I pronounced that right, Elda. Because Elda is a retired kindergarten school teacher after, what, 30 or 35 years, Elda? Elda formatted the contents of the book and also served as the joint editor with Charlie, and served as another set of super eagle eyes, and still is doing that, finding little nuances, little errors that we might have made. And Elda is also helping with another part of the project I'll mention here shortly. But Elda, please stand up and please give Elda a round of applause. Reunion committee, and I have 20 minutes left, thank you. The reunion committee. Not only was Dan on the reunion committee, along with Ron Demery, but we also had Pete Manza, class 3167, Charlie 2. For those who don't know Pete, it's tough to get the smile wiped off of his face. It is.
Chuckles.
Yeah. But anyway, Pete is direct and to the point, logical thinking. When we start exchanging emails about something on the reunion, it's usually Pete that just lays her right out in a few words, and voila, you know. So thank you, Pete, for doing that. And Pete and I, as I mentioned, we were at Fort Carson together. So Pete, please stand up one more time. Again. Also on the committee was Jim Shepard, or Shepherd. I like Shepard, it sounds kind of French, but Jim said it's Shepherd. Also class, excuse me, 3167, Charlie 2. A lot of Charlie 2 people, or Charlie Company people working on the project. Jim has a wonderful memory of OCS. I think you might have, we weren't able to be here in my class last night, so hopefully Jim told some stories that he remembered. Some of the things he remembered about OCS are in our book, as memories from other individuals are also in the book. Jim has very strong beliefs about what should be in a reunion. And ironically, Jim graduated, completed the course of OCS, Armor OCS, but he was not commissioned because of a health situation. So he stayed on a Charlie Company, kind of as a third lieutenant assistant TAC officer, as I understand it. short history, or short to the point, he eventually was commissioned in his MOS, I think it was AIT, Ordnance AIT. He was commissioned as Second Lieutenant of Ordnance. So, Jim, thank you very much. You're a flame for us. Okay. Please, Jim, please stand up. Okay, the most important people, our spouses, who put up with us from the many hours we spent at the computer. I won't mention them, but spouses of those individuals, please stand up. Sandy. Thank you all, ladies. Every TAC officer, every OC, every XO, every company commander who remembered names, especially C Company Commander Bob Familetti, Colonel Familetti, if you are here, please stand up because I would love to meet you, see you. You have helped with so many names. Thank you. Every once in a while I'd send an email to Bob. That's how he always signed off Bob. And I asked him how he preferred me to address him. He said Bob, so it's Bob. From time to time, I'd kind of keep him up to date what was going on, and he would say, keep up the fire. So we kept up the fire. Thank you. Okay, what has been done thus far, other than the reunion? We have a Facebook group. You're all invited to join. If you yourself don't do Facebook, but your spouse does, they can join, and you can enjoy all of the stories and postings on that. We feel we've written a fairly respectable written history of OCS at Fort Knox that is now the only source for information about OCS at Fort Knox. We have an extensive listing of the graduates, company officer cadre, but there are still some holes in it that we're trying to fill in. There has been some confusion about the reunion book and the book about OCS at Fort Knox. The reunion, or the book about the history of Fort Knox, or the OCS at Fort Knox, is not the same as the reunion book. Okay? The reunion book is what you paid for already. The Knox book about OCS is something you'll have to order through us. What's next for the project? We're talking about doing a website for those who don't use Facebook, so more individuals can see this information. We're continuing to gather information about grads. We're in the process of noting for each class the dates of birth of each graduate. I send that information to Elda. In her words, she sleuths the names on a search engine. It's called instantcheckmate.com. Dick Holdcraft from 1466 told me about that, and it's a pretty good source of finding names, or not names, but addresses and phone numbers. Once those are accumulated for a class, I check another website. It's called Find a Grave to see if anyone is possibly deceased or not. If they're not there, I send the names off to John Moore. He has about 2 or 3 sites that he checks, and that's how we're continuing to locate individuals. We're searching for more company officer cadre. I just learned one tonight from Gert. Gert said there was a TAC officer, Higgins, in Charlie Company. So now we've got another TAC officer to look for. We're looking for a TAC officer by the last name of Halliday. I think the OCs call him Doc, like Doc Holliday instead of Doc. It's Doc Halliday. Rick Badger is another one we haven't found yet. Charlie Titus swore up and down to me that there was a TAC officer in for his company by the name of Bowen. So we're looking for that individual. Trying to find an XO by the name of Joe Oliphant. Haven't found him yet. Haven't found H Company Commander Richard Carter. So that's what we're going to continue to do this afternoon. We talked about should we have another reunion. Overwhelmingly, the individuals who were at that brief meeting said yes. Where? We came up with different possible sites: Fort Hood, Fort Carson, San Antonio, Fort Benning, Fort Irwin. So we're looking at different places. We'll employ another professional reunion planner. We're getting too lazy to do it ourselves, so we'll have them do it. Looking at doing another reunion in 2 years, and as more information comes about, that information will go out to the POCs. If your class doesn't have a POC, I'll get in touch with everybody in that class. So lastly, we need to thank some individuals. I won't mention all of their names because it's you. Thank you all for coming. All of this planning, all of this work would not be a success without you coming here tonight. A lot of individuals come from the West Coast, California, come from all over, New York, Florida. It's fantastic that you've all come. That's the last thing I have, other than one thing. It's my lost and found announcement. I guess we were over in the hospitality room and talking with various individuals, and I noticed, thought I stepped on something, didn't know what it was, and looked down, and it was a large roll of $20 bills secured by a rubber band. Did anyone lose that? Who was it? Anyone? Who was it? Where were they? Here's your rubber band. Thank you all for coming.